I can just put myself so easily in every single one of your stories, just from childhood, my generation, as we've discovered by having online Zoom calls over the course of a year, and just listening to everyone in mine and Cheryl's generation share stories of our childhood. There was a common thread of one, if not both, parents being alcoholic. And, as we know, we are our parents until we do something different. Just by default, it's because we've had, 20 years of programming. So growing up, it was a very volatile environment for me. I witnessed the abuse between my parents, mostly verbal. Occasionally, when my dad would drink too much, then it got a little bit heavier. But I also know now, to go back and look at my parents' situation, which was 1,000 times more horrendous than mine, and what the situations in which they grew up. So when I look at the type of parents they were versus the parenting that they had, they actually did an amazing job. My dad was abandoned by both of his parents and raised by a grandmother who did not want him. My mom was, nearly the youngest of 6 kids during the Great Depression. Just another mouth to feed, a total burden. So, but I was no different when I became a teenager. And I was my mom's therapist from the age of 7 years old. Tried to save her. She just confided in me everything that my dad was doing to her, from a 7-year-old for many years. So, very similar to you, Jillian, I just felt like it was my duty to support and save her. Until I started becoming of age, so probably around 17, 18, as you mentioned, just they didn't like my music either. And I just wanted out of there. So when I went to college, just the distance was more, and not that it was really, I drew a line in the sand, like you mentioned, Aaliyah. It was more of just, we didn't have cell phones. So in college, if I wanted to call home, I had to find a payphone, and I never had a dime to make that phone call. So it just didn't happen. And now I'm in my own world. But so now I'm in my mid-20s, and I'm married, and now I'm having kids. And I started to see myself as my mom. And that was the last thing I wanted. She was just so negative. She couldn't talk without yelling. I come from a long line of angry German women. And it's just how we talk. There's often times now that my second husband will say to me, "You're talking really loud." Mm-hmm. And it was just the environment in which I grew up in. Everything was just always super loud, super volatile, or complete dead silence. There was just never an in between. So I had my first daughter, and my second daughter died. So I relate to what Cheryl is saying. The older we get, the more birthdays they have, just the more life experience we have, that we lived through, that we experience. And what catapulted my estrangement to my mom was when my second daughter died. She said to me, "If you were going to church, this wouldn't have happened." Well, a young 20-something really can't handle the shame of that, especially since I grew up in such a religious environment. And so I really had no choice but to just not have her in my life, because every time we would talk, it was always just this religious beating of I wasn't living my life right. So we became estranged for many years. But I want to share this really quickly before I get into my estrangement story, because my mom is now almost 80, and much like Aaliyah's mom, she's very negative, and a lot of times it's very difficult to talk to her. Love her now more than anything. We have a great relationship. She finally says, "I love you now." I mean, it's this estrangement has changed all my relationships in so many ways. So it's been interesting to watch the dynamic with my mom. And I recently asked her before this call, I said, what were you doing during that time in my 20s when I didn't talk to you? You know, there was no internet, so she's not privy to this being, you know, an epidemic or anything. And she just said to me, you know, I don't even think I realized you weren't talking to me because I was just trying to survive. She had finally left my dad after 20 years. And my little sister was still at home, who was, you know, only in junior high. She was a lot younger than me. And my mom was working 3 jobs. And just like she said, she was trying to survive. She wasn't even aware that I was angry and not talking to her. And what really now going through this, because everything, believe me, does come full circle. But what surprises me the most or makes me the most sad is that in my mid-20s, I became a multimillionaire. I could have helped her. And I just had no idea that was her life. She had no idea what was my life. So it's just parallel realities happening at the same time that we just weren't even aware of what the other person was going through because we were trying to survive. So now I have my 2 babies. I have 2 daughters. And now my marriage is somehow going down this path of becoming like my parents. And I'm caught in this marriage of like, how could this be? You know, and now my husband's becoming my dad, and just the control and the verbal abuse and the crazy things that were beginning to unfold in our marriage. And there was one key thing that I believe that I had that perhaps Cheryl didn't, or most mid-20-year-olds didn't have. I had money. Right? I had the ability to have an escape route. And I took that. So at the time of my divorce, my girls were only 2 and 5. So were they better off because of that? I don't know. Now we know there's so many psychological implications to just divorce in general, or somebody not growing up with 2 parents. So is it better to have 2 physical bodies there versus only just, I mean, we don't know. It's like Cheryl said, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. It doesn't matter. Estrangement doesn't care if you stayed with the same person, or if you had 5 marriages, or if you only had, it doesn't matter. But what I witnessed when I was going through the time of raising my daughters, one, I didn't have time to be on the phone and call friends, certainly not my mom. I was just so busy trying to figure my life out. And on occasion, if I would date people, I really noticed a change with my daughters. They're like, who is this? What's going on? So for nearly 2 decades, until my oldest went to college, they really didn't even know I dated. It happened every other weekend when they were with their dad, because I recognized how challenging it was for them to witness me in that relationship. And besides, their dad was also, and I don't want to bash him because he was such he was such an important person in their life as well, like 2 parents are. But he had married and divorced 5 times during that period. So they had this constant influx of change in other partners. And of course, again, the irony through the parental alienation that's happened, I'm the one who became estranged, and he's gotten closer to them. But something recently happened that shifted, but I'm not going to share. But so I raised my daughters alone, and thought I was doing a good job. I was very hands-on. I had a very flexible career. I could be there for them when they needed me. And that's what I thought I did. But I fully recognized that I was raising 2 very different human beings. My first daughter was this just red hair, blue eyes, go-getter, type A, wouldn't stop, wouldn't slow down, never took a nap, couldn't have enough activities going on to keep this kid busy. And my second daughter came along, and she was just this sweet, gentle little soul who just wanted to be at home and was ready. She would put herself in bed when she needed a nap. And they were raised very differently. And my first daughter, I let experience more in the world because it was her personality and it was who she was. But my second daughter, I didn't want my little sweet little baby to have to deal with the rough world that was out there. So did I protect her a little bit more? I did. But I was also harder on her because my first daughter, I constantly was saying, slow down, relax, just go watch TV, take it easy. And my second, I was constantly saying, come on now, we got to get our homework done. We got to do this. It's time to engage. So they were raised very, very differently. And this is important for me to share this because they believe that I favored my oldest daughter. And that's part of this big estrangement because I talk to my older daughter now, not initially. So they grew up with this belief system that I favored her because I was harder on my younger daughter because she just wasn't built for the crazy, mean world that she was going to become a part of. And I was the one who was tough on her. So, but we were close. The three of us were very close. And my estrangement came out of the blue, I thought, because we went from talking on the phone every week for an hour or two, mostly laughing. We would always crack each other up. And she was going through college and then getting ready to start law school and things I thought were really good. And then one day a really weird thing happened, which, you know, Jillian and I are going to come back to in a minute because we both had this same experience. But all of a sudden, things just went really south really quickly. And to try to make sense of this argument we had, I was yelling and screaming and triggering her apparently with my yelling and screaming, like what she claimed I always did. And so then there was just, she decided, I don't know how long, I can't talk to you, but I can't talk to you. So we actually did have a very verbal falling out. And I tried to reach out and I tried to apologize and tried to ask what just happened because I was just stunned. And then, but she at that point, she wouldn't engage with me. So now my older daughter comes in and she also says, she starts kind of delivering through what her sister was feeling. Okay. And this kid doesn't hold anything back. She's just a powerhouse. When she was 5 years old, she would look up at me with her two big red ponytails and she would just say, why do you get to make all the decisions? So that's who she is. And she's the one that delivered the blow and told me everything that I had done wrong since the beginning of time. And after about the seventh or eighth item on that list, probably after the third or fourth item on that list, I just checked out. I just didn't even know what I was hearing anymore. And now not only did I lose my first daughter, but now I lost my second. Well, they were my world. I didn't have relationships. I put everything into them, making sure they had everything I didn't have. They played musical instruments. They were so talented. They went to a private school, had the best education. They learned how to play chess, to be strategic thinkers. They went to spiritual schools, a Montessori school at first, and then a Catholic high school. Not that we're Catholic, but just that I believe God belongs in school. And I raised them on a very spiritual path. So much so that I was always in their schools teaching spirituality. It was just part of my life with them. And I was a photographer for many years. And from the time they were like 5 years old, I would go in and teach after school enrichment programs on the spirituality of photography and the importance of staying focused and opening your light with that aperture. And just the camera was used as a metaphor for a spiritual teaching. And then in junior high, I went and spoke to 200 junior high kids, about, in this very affluent private school, about how money is not going to make you happy. Of course, my youngest daughter was just horrified that her mom had the microphone in front of 200 of her peers. But this was their life. I raised them in a very spiritual environment, meditation, take breaks, no electronics, time out. That's how they were raised. And it was all wrong, apparently. So when my second daughter delivered the list and how she justified her sister's estrangement, I didn't see a reason to live anymore. And I wasn't going to tell anybody because I didn't want it to be stopped. If somebody tells you that they're thinking those things, they want help and they want you to stop. If they don't, it's often too late. So I'm with my second husband, which I was aware, even though my kids were much older and gone, I still felt that they felt like I was choosing him over them. I always felt that. I could feel it from them because we were so close. And I didn't know how to bridge it, to be honest. I mean, he had his kids, I had my kids, and I knew I didn't do a good job. And I don't even know if there was a way to bridge your second marriage. I don't know. But I have my second husband, and at the time we had a cabin cruiser on Lake Pend Oreille, which is this huge, huge lake in North Idaho. And it's very cold. And I always told him that, if I was ever dying of a terminal disease, that in the middle of January, I would just want him to bring me out to the lake and just dump my body in Lake Pend Oreille, because I wanted to freeze to death, because freezing is the most peaceful way to die. And so I'd been contemplating this. And one morning we would go out early in the morning. Sometimes we would sleep at the boat in the dock, and then we would go out before the sunrise, and there was just no other boats out there, maybe an occasional fisherman, but you never saw anything out on that lake. And so I got in the water, which I do, because it's, great cryotherapy, and I'm a swimmer. I love swimming every day. And so this one day I decided to get in the water, and I'm moving farther and farther and farther away from the boat. And he even yells out at me, you're getting too far away, and I can't come get you. And I just kept going farther and farther and farther out, and the water was freezing, and my arms and legs were getting numb. And so I just floated back on my back, and I was just going to check out. And then something amazing happened. The sun came up, and it was so warm on my face. And I looked up, and I could see the sun at the horizon, and there were those light beams coming across the water. And it just became a lifeline at that minute. And then there was that voice that said, not today, not today. Get your ass back to that boat. Not today. So I flailed myself back to the boat with very numb arms and legs. I didn't really know what it meant. I didn't know why I was even going back to the boat. Sat there just shivering, trying to thaw out. My husband even said to me, it'd be very selfish of you to do something stupid. But I didn't know what that next thing was. But I just took a step. I just took a big leap of faith. And that week I started the Zoom call for parents with no agenda. And that's where I met so many wonderful people who were listening, and Cheryl and Dr. Ruth. And for a year, we just shared. And then at a year, I reached out to my daughter, and because she said, I need time. So I reached out to her at a year and said, when is this going to end? course, I said it very gently. And she said, I don't see a hat changing in the foreseeable future. So I said, all right, it's time to do the work. It's time to do my work. I've done this work so many times. I have been through so many hardships, like all of you. I have engaged my spiritual practice so many times. And this one was like, wow, really, God? Really? This is the lesson. And I just did it. I just said, okay. And I started going through a process which was similar to my process that I'd done in the past, but in a very different way, because there's nothing like the pain of estrangement. It's a broken heart, but this broken heart is nothing like a romantic broken heart. So I'm familiar with the whole gamut of all of these things. And so I just went through this process, and I created a course as I was going through it. Some of you have gone through it. And now it's the 4 levels of relationships. The only relationship that ever matters with any of us is the relationship we have with ourselves. And we know this. We know it's always ourselves that we have to reconcile with. You know, Jillian had to reconcile with herself, not her mom. Aaliyah came to terms with herself, not her mom. Same with Cheryl. First level is when we're the victims that we've all experienced and that we talked about. And we experience those emotions of the lowest level of consciousness being shame, which is accompanied by suicide. And if we can't stay there, what we do is we blame. If we are in such the deepest depths of shame, the only way out of that is to blame someone else. So if my daughters are experiencing any level of shame whatsoever, and they need to blame me, they can blame me. I don't know how long it's going to take. And level 1 is also that guilt and the regret and the overwhelm and the fear. The fear is the ceiling that holds us captive in that miserable, miserable place. But to get out of that sadness and the sorrow and the crying and the missing them, we move into level 2, which is anger. And we stay there and we become justified in that anger and that bitterness, and we get pissed off, and it's justifiable. And if we want to keep moving, level 3 is forgiveness. Level 4 is love. Cheryl and I just completed level 4. A few others on the call have just completed level 4. And it's just learning to see this whole thing so differently and healing our wounds, because they've existed for all of us. We all have this. And it's our work and our journey. And here's where we are. And then meeting Aaliyah and making this a whole other something, and her introducing us to Jillian. And, you know, here we are. We don't know where this is going. We just said yes to something. We just said, yeah, I'm willing to show up. I'm willing to accept whatever it is that I can do, that we can do to help others on this journey with us.